Rule 2, players. This rule is just one page long, but they have really crammed a lot of do's and don'ts into this. And this rule really covers who can play in what tournaments, at what levels, and who can't, and how you can substitute for an injury or just regular substitution, what's a qualified substitute, and all that. Of all the rules in the book, this one is probably one of the most misunderstood. And the reason is there's a whole lot of information in just a little itty bitty space. So we're going to have to go through it line by line. So what I'm going to do, we're going to take this in little chunks, and I'm going to tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And I'm going to be very specific, and we're going to cover the entire rule, and we're going to do it very simply. Or we're going to try to do it very simply. First, as an overriding principle to this rule, when you're talking about substituting players, think of it this way. If there is an open spot, an open position on the field during a chukker, so for example, a team only has 3 players and they're supposed to have 4, and then they only have 3 on the field, so there's an open position. Then a substitute, that's a qualified substitute, which we'll go over in a minute, can go ahead and run on the field at any time because the position's open. Now, if there are 4 players on the field during a chukker for each team, there is no open position for substitution. So you cannot substitute during a chukker, period. End of story, unless there's an injury. But if there's an injury, that injured player leaves the field, now there's an open position in the middle of a chukker. Okay, so you can only substitute during a chukker if there's an open position on the field. You can substitute between chukkers unlimited, as long as your substitutes fall within the rules. In other words, if they're qualified substitutes. Yeah, you can, just like any other sport. Of course, other sports, I don't really know the rules, but you know, they have a team of 50 and they only have 11 players on the field, or 10 players on the field, or whatever. Okay, so you could have 50 polo players and only have 4 players on the field at any one time and substitute them in and out between chukkers as long as those substitutes are qualified. No one does that, but that was fun to say. You can only play for one team in a tournament. That's it. You may not play for more than one team in a tournament. Kind of like the horses. The horses can only play for one team in a tournament. They can't play for another team. Okay? So that's clear. Unless there's an injury. If there's an injury and you need to substitute for the injured player, first you'll look for a substitute that has not played in the tournament and is not going to play in the tournament for anyone else. Also, that substitute has to have his dues paid and have a current handicap with the USPA. That's a given. If you cannot find one of those, you can use a player who has played in the tournament that has been eliminated and played their last game. In other words, they're done. And they can substitute for your injured player for the remainder of that game and any further games in that tournament. But only for you. They can't substitute on any other teams. And that's only for injury. Let's be even more specific with that particular caveat to the rule. If a player starts a game with a known injury, and that known injury is the reason they're leaving the game and substituting, they cannot use a player that's played in the tournament and has been eliminated. Okay? That's only if they get injured during the game, then they can. But if they're starting a game with a known injury, and then they're going to leave after the first 2 seconds, then they have to find a substitute that has not played in the tournament and been eliminated. Okay? And that was a loophole that was covered up, I think it was about 3-4 years ago, probably 2015-ish, something like that, in the East Coast Open. Players were starting the game, play 1 second, stop, get off, and get a substitute that has already played in the tournament. Because you're looking for the best substitute you can because you want to win. It makes sense, understand it, but that's what you can no longer do that. Okay, now, moving on. If the event defined as a high goal polo event, if your 7-goaler
8-goaler, 9-goaler, or 10-goaler gets injured, remember, these are in very short supply.
Then you can replace them for the remainder of that game with a player of equal or lesser handicap that is also playing in the tournament, even though they haven't been eliminated yet.
You can replace your injured 7, 8, 9, or 10 goaler with
that other player for the remainder of that particular game. For all of your remaining games in that event, that tournament, that player cannot keep substituting for you. It's just for that one game, and you'll have to go ahead and get a qualified substitute for your next game. So you'll have to fly someone in or try to find someone else worthy of the position and replace them with that person. Okay, now further along in the tournament,
if your 7, 8, 9, or 10 goaler gets injured,
then you can substitute them with a player of equal or lesser handicap who has played in the same tournament but is now completely eliminated. And they can substitute for the remainder of that game and for the rest of the tournament, but only for your team. And that also counts whatever the injury is. Say he broke his wrist snowboarding or surfing or something. That works as well, as long as the replacement, the substitute, is now finished in that tournament. They're out. We already mentioned that you have to have your dues paid, be a USP member with your current dues paid, and have a current handicap assigned to you. Otherwise, you are not a qualified substitute. So make sure. Okay, violations of this rule. In other words, if you substitute improperly, or you use a substitute that's not qualified or hasn't paid their dues, or is not eliminated from the tournament, or all those conditions we just mentioned. If you do that, okay, this is not a penalty that the umpires can choose not to call. You know, if you go to the umpire section, I mentioned that umpires have full discretion not to call certain fouls. But this is not one of those, okay? Of course, if we know, we're going to immediately take action. Tell that team you're disqualified, okay? And let them offer up any evidence they have to the contrary. But the rule is fairly straightforward once you go through it line by line. Okay, with that being said, who is really going to complain about this if nobody's on it? The losing team. Hello? Players that have paid their dues and are registered with the USPA and hold a current USPA handicap may play in USPA tournaments, except a -1 goal player may not play in a tournament above 12 goals. In 3-goal polo and below, the highest rated member on your team cannot be more than 1 goal over the upper limit of the event. So if you're in, say, a 3-goal tournament, you can have a 4-goal player on your team, but you can't have a 5-goal player on your team. Okay, makes sense? Also, only 1 negative rated player per team is allowed in over 6-goal polo. And if you have an injury or something, that doesn't count for substitutions. Subs are exempt from that. But if the only substitutes that are available are -1 and -0.5, and you need one of them, and that would make you have more than 1 -1 or 1 -0.5 on your team, because of the rule we just mentioned, that's okay if they're the only ones available. But you're going to have to play with your original team handicap. So if you're 0-goal player, if you already have a -1 goal player on your team and you're playing in a 10-goal, and your 0-goal player can't play for some reason, and the only person you can find is also another -1 or -0.5, you can go ahead and use them. The 3/4 rule. This rule starts at 4-goal tournaments and above. And this rule says you cannot have one player on your team that takes up more than 3/4 of the total handicap of the team. So let's make this easy. If it's a 4-goal tournament, you can only have the highest rated player on your team can be 3 goals. If it's a 6-goal tournament, the highest rated player on your team can be 4 goals. and no higher. If it's an 8-goal tournament, the highest rated player on your team can be 6 goals and no higher, and so on and so forth. Just 3/4 of the team or less. That's how high handicap one singular player on your team can be. So the 3/4 rule, no one player can be more than 3/4 of your entire team handicap. T ratings. T stands for temporary. If your handicap has a T next to it, that means you can be moved up or down at any time. Very scary, but it's a good thing because sometimes we're not sure exactly how well a player is playing. So if you haven't played in a while and you want to get back into it, and you used to be 5 goals and now you claim that you're 1 goal, which is exactly what I would do if I wanted to play again, they're going to put a T next to that because they don't trust you, nor should they. But in any case, the only person that can remove the T from your handicap is the chairman of the National Handicap Committee, and that changes from time to time. So we're not going to name a name. We don't name names. Actually, we do, but we won't here because that's going to, by the time this video comes out and other things happen, we may have a different one. But anyway, that person is the only one that can remove a T from your rating. Since we're talking about T ratings, there's a rule in here that I never even knew about, but I think it's an excellent rule, and I know why they put it in here. If you have a T rating, a T next to your handicap in your rating, and you're 6 goals or less, you cannot play in a USPA tournament of 16 goals and above. If the tournament handicap is 16 goals and above, and you're 6 goals or less with a T next to your rating, you cannot play in that tournament. All right, and lastly, under Rule 2 players, you cannot play if you're drunk, if you're sick and hopped up on cold medicine, if you're impaired in any way. So, you know, it has to be noticeable to the umpires. So think of it this way. If you're going to get in your car and drive to the field, you're probably okay to play. You know, and that is Rule 2 players.